There is no better source to start this hour than our own Fareed Zakaria on all of this, and he joins me now. And Fareed, obviously, just to give everyone, I was at the White House all day. To catch everyone up, what had happened is before Prime Minister Netanyahu even got there, Trump was suggesting that Palestinians should leave Gaza, that it's not livable, that it's going to take 10 to 15 years to rebuild because of all the destruction there from the Israeli strikes since October 7th, since this war has started. Then he repeated it again in the Oval Office with Netanyahu seated by his side. And then he came out at that press conference, and that is when he made the news on his own without being asked by a reporter about the U.S. taking over the Gaza Strip. Obviously an extraordinary statement from an American president. What are your takeaways, Fareed?
Well, it's breathtaking, and one doesn't really know where to begin. You asked the central question, Caitlin, which is, where would these people go? There are 2 million Palestinians in Gaza who have lived through several wars, several, incredibly intense bouts of violence with Israel because they want to live on their land. As you say, the neighboring countries, Egypt and Jordan, have both categorically and repeatedly said that they're not going to take people in. So it's not entirely clear how this happens. The United States would have to invade Gaza, would have to expel Hamas, would have to conduct counterinsurgency operations against an insurgency there that would exist, would also have to persuade Egypt and Jordan to take these refugees. And, one has to point out, outside of all the geopolitical issues that raises, this is a president who came in saying he wanted to focus on America first. He didn't want us engaging in any grand global projects. Well, I mean, this is another war in the Middle East. And the last war in the Middle East we took part in ended up stretching out much longer, was much more complicated, and cost about $2 trillion. So, it seems very unlikely that this can go smoothly. You can imagine American power forcing the Egyptians to do something, forcing the Jordanians to do something. But you're going to have to put military on the ground to get Hamas to cede power, to get the Palestinians to move, to secure that area. And that is another military intervention in the Middle East. And I thought President Trump ran in 2016 explaining that that was precisely why he was running. He wanted to stop America's senseless adventures in the Middle East.
Yeah, that's what he has repeated time and time again. He said no new wars on his watch. He has talked about that. But also just in this moment, for a region that is going to be waking up to these comments from the president. I mean, I've been messaging with sources already, even an Israeli official acknowledging how difficult this would be to implement. What it means for the ceasefire deal that is in place right now. I mean, if you're Hamas, which is obviously the other party of this agreement, and they see the U.S. president saying, we're going to take over the Gaza Strip, does this mean the ceasefire deal still holds, or that, I mean, there are still hostages being held by Hamas there?
I suspect that the ceasefire deal has its own problems. As you know, essentially Israeli troops have to withdraw from certain parts when you get to phase 2. That's a very tough bar for Israelis. The finance minister has said he's going to leave the coalition if that happens. So I think that has its own dynamic. But you're right to point to the question of Hamas. What will Hamas do? Hamas will dig in, because Hamas will say, look, there is a prospect that there is going to be an effort to forcibly displace the Palestinians, which means we are going to dig in. We are going to try to make sure that we are, we are there to launch an insurgency if it needs to happen. And it's really important to remember that no matter how powerful you are, if you are in a foreign territory against a local insurgency and you do not have the support of the population, that is a very hard military operation to succeed at. That's what we discovered in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Vietnam. So this is not likely to be that easy. And Hamas, my guess is preparing for the prospect that they are going to have to resist some kind of American involvement. Now, whether it gets to all that, you never know, because with President Trump, he may forget about all this tomorrow. But it's important to point out, what he is articulating is essentially a kind of Israeli right-wing fantasy that has existed for a long time, that somehow the Palestinians leave Gaza and the West Bank, and that you end up with an Israel from the river to the sea, and you've sort of solved the problem. The reality is the Palestinians don't want to leave, and I don't think the president said anything that's going to make it more likely that they will want to leave. And
it's not clear at all where they would go. To watch Prime Minister Netanyahu's reaction as this was being said was remarkable in and of itself. Fareed Zakaria, I couldn't think of anyone better to start the show with. Thank you for joining with your insights. And my next source tonight is the Israeli journalist Nadav Ayal. Nadav, we met in Israel as we were covering the aftermath of October 7th, this war that has been raging for 16 months. What's your initial takeaway? What are you hearing from sources tonight on this remarkable announcement from the White House?
Great to join you, Caitlin. Well, first of all, as far as the Israelis are concerned, and specifically Netanyahu and his right-wing coalition, they just won the lottery. This is how they see it. This is, as Fareed has said, a long-time idea within the hard right in Israel, I would say the far right in Israel, that there will be massive immigration of Palestinians either from Judea and Samaria or from the Gaza Strip, and Israel will be able to base itself in these areas. Now, I should say that the president was quite clear in one of the answers to the questions that he doesn't think that there should be new settlements at the Gaza Strip. And he was talking about the United States taking ownership of the Gaza Strip. Well, as far as the Israelis are concerned, this government is concerned, Benjamin Netanyahu, Ron Dermer, who was in close contact with Steve Witkoff and with the White House towards these declarations today, this is a fantastic idea to have the United States there. I would caution in the sense that if you actually listen to what the Prime Minister has said, and he was sitting beside the president, he didn't say anything about this specific plan at all. He talked about Israel's war aims, the published war aims of Israel to make sure that the Hamas rule doesn't exist in the Gaza Strip and the hostages are back home.
Yeah, he was saying it was an interesting idea to pursue and to look at and to explore, but he didn't say, yes, I agree that we should fully do this. I was listening very closely to that. I want you to listen to when Trump was asked this idea of the U.S. taking over a sovereign territory, his answer to that question from a reporter.
Mr. Prime Minister, do you see this idea as a way to expand the boundaries of Israel and to have a longer peace, even though the Israeli people know how important that land is to you and your citizens, just as the space is inherited by the Palestinians as well?
I do see a long-term ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East and maybe the entire Middle East. And everybody I've spoken to, this was not a decision made lightly. Everybody I've spoken to loves the idea of the United States owning that piece of land, developing and creating thousands of jobs with something that will be magnificent.
Now, he did not say which leaders he's spoken with. We know King Abdullah of Jordan is coming here next week. We've heard Saudi Arabia say previously that they believe any normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel has to include the establishment of a Palestinian state. What do you think leaders in the region make of this claim?
Look, the fear of leaders across the region, I'm not talking right now about Israel, the fear there, according to my sources, is that this would lead to a sort of destabilization in their own street and local public. The Palestinian issue, specifically after more than a year of a war, is something that has been at the top of the news cycle across the Middle East, a major source of friction and criticism towards different Arab regimes. And now it seems that those moderate Arab regimes that are allied with the United States are now hearing from the US an idea about the displacement of Palestinians. This is how Arab leaders are seeing this. And less than an hour ago, the Saudi Foreign Ministry, as you said, Caitlin, issued another PR a notice saying basically there should be a Palestinian state. We're not going to have normalization with Israel. were against any idea of displacing Palestinians. And by the way, if you actually listen to what Trump said, he didn't speak about displacing forcibly, expelling the Palestinians. He was talking about a sort of a suggestion, an offer of relocation of sorts. It wasn't completely clear what would be the mechanics of this, or what would the Palestinians be offered. And as far as I know, Israelis don't hold a coherent plan to see this as happening, and they themselves were surprised to the extent of the president's commitment to this idea. So the idea was floated in talks between Jerusalem and Washington before this press conference, but the level of commitment showed by the president to the idea of ownership was surprising.